Welcome back to a Psalm a Day. We are in Psalm chapter 55. Would you join me as I read? The Bible says, "Give ear to my prayer, O God, and hide not thyself from my supplication. Attend unto me and hear me. I mourn in my complaint and make a noise, because of the voice of the enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked. For they cast iniquity upon me, and in wrath they hate me. My heart is sore pained within me, and the terrors of death are fallen upon me. Fearfulness and trembling are come upon me, and horror hath overwhelmed me. And I said, Oh, that I had wings like a dove, for then would I fly away and be at rest. Lo, then would I wander off and remain in the wilderness, Selah. I would hasten my escape from the windy storm and tempest. Destroy, O Lord, and divide their tongues, for I have seen violence and strife in the city. Day and night they go about it, upon the walls thereof. Mischief also and sorrow are in the midst of it. Wickedness is in the midst thereof. Deceit and guile depart not from her streets. For it was not an enemy that reproached me. Then I could have borne it. Neither was it he that hated me that did magnify himself against me. Then I would have hid myself from him. But it was thou, a man mine equal, my guide and mine acquaintance. We took sweet counsel together, and walked unto the house of God in company. Let death seize upon them, and let them go down quick into hell. For wickedness is in their dwellings, and among them. As for me, I will call upon God, and the Lord shall save me. Evening and morning and at noon will I pray and cry aloud, and he shall hear my voice. He hath delivered my soul in peace from the battle that was against me, for there were many with me. God shall hear and afflict them, even he that abideth of old, Selah. Because they have no changes, therefore they fear not God. He hath put forth his hands against such as be at peace with him. He hath broken his covenant. The words of his mouth were smoother than butter, but war was in his heart. His words were softer than oil, yet were they drawn swords. Cast thy burden upon the Lord, and he shall sustain thee. He shall never suffer the righteous to be moved. But thou, O God, shalt bring them down into the pit of destruction. Bloody and deceitful men shall not live out half their days, but I will trust in thee." As we look at Psalm chapter 55, we see, first of all, in verses 9 through 11, we see that these people are in the city. They are with David. He says in verse 9, "Destroy, O Lord, and divide their tongues, for I have seen violence and strife in the city." He says in verse 10 that they go about it upon the walls, and he says that their mischief and sorrow are in the midst of it. In verse 11 it says, "Deceit and guile depart not from her streets." And so this is not enemies that are far away from David or in another country, but they are in the very city, the same city that David is in. He says in verse 12, verse 12 through 14, we see that it is a friend. David says, "For it was not an enemy that reproached me." He said, "Then I could have borne it. I could have carried it. I could have dealt with it. Neither was it he that hated me that did magnify himself against me. Then I would have hid myself from him." We see but verse 13, "But it was thou, a man mine equal, my guide and mine acquaintance. We took sweet counsel together, and walked unto the house of God in company." And I was reminded of two things. First of all, I was reminded of David's sin with Bathsheba, and how he betrayed Uriah the Hittite. And he not only committed adultery with Uriah's wife, but Uriah, there's no point that we know that Uriah finds out that David committed adultery with his wife, because he's put in the forefront, and the rest of the army drops behind, and Uriah dies in battle. So I don't think Uriah lived to see that or find out that David had committed that sin. So David kills Uriah, and we see in 2 Samuel that Uriah is listed as one of David's mighty men. And so it was a friend. Uriah was betrayed by a close friend, and David says here in verse 13, that it was a man his equal and his guide and his acquaintance. They took sweet counsel together. They walked into the house of God. I was reminded of Uriah the Hittite and David. But I was secondly reminded of a sermon that I just preached this past Sunday. And I said that let it not be said of us that we are the reason that the person in the pew or in the chair next to us is the reason, or we are the reason that they walk out of the will of God and they leave the church and they leave what the Lord wants and has for them. And so I was reminded in verse 14 that it was not just some random person. It was not an enemy. It was not a wicked random person, but it was David's acquaintance, someone who he had sweet counsel with and had a company with, and they went to the house of God together. And so we need to be careful. We need to be careful about our reputation and our testimony in our life. And we see also in verse 18, we see that David recognizes, he recalls to memory, he hath delivered my soul in peace from the battle that was against me, for there were many with me. So David, he has seen many victories. He has seen time and time again that God has saved him before, and he's asking him to do it again. And we see in verse 22, it's a cross-reference with 1 Peter 5 in verse 7. Verse 22 says, Cast thy burden upon the Lord, and he shall sustain thee. He shall never suffer the righteous to be moved. And lastly, verse 23. Regardless of others, David chooses to trust the Lord. He says, But thou, O God, shalt bring them down into the pit of destruction. Bloody and deceitful men shall not live out half their days, but I will trust in thee. So what is our application? To remind us that in trials, trust God. Look to God. Trials bring us closer to God and brings us and it deepens our faith. It tries our faith and it brings us closer to the Lord. And you can look at the story of Job. The Lord allowed Job to go through everything that he went through, but at the end he was restored sevenfold. And so I encourage you, if you're going through something today and you feel like there's no way out, you're just in a trial, you've been tempted, whatever you're going through, trust the Lord, look to the Lord. Because if you can look through your life and you can see that the Lord has done it before, let me encourage you, because he will do it again. If you haven't seen the Lord deliver you, well, have faith and trust the Lord, because this time he just may. And so I hope this was an encouragement to you. The outline will be in the description below a little bit later. And so I hope this encouraged you today. And we will see you tomorrow for Psalm chapter 56.